Hello, my friends, and everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible. We are back in Exodus, chapters 16 and 17, and we're gonna have to wrestle with the question, who actually wrote the book of Exodus? Yeah, there's some stuff in 16 that's gonna make us ask this question. We're also going to encounter a sneak peek into what God is actually asking the Israelites to do when he says, go into Canaan and wipe out everyone in the land. There's something I think that maybe we've been missing for a long time, and this is going to give us an insight into what he's actually doing. The Bible's about to get very real. We might get a little bit colorful, so buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. So at the end of chapter 15, we see that Israel is hanging out at this place called Elim, which is a little bit of like an oasis. And just from a practical standpoint, you can't really stay at an oasis very long. It's not a very big spot. It's not very defensible. And there are lots of people who are going to want access to the oasis, especially traveling through the area. So it's time for them to leave. They're not supposed to stay there anyway, right? God's trying to take them somewhere. First to Sinai, where they're going to experience God in a brand new way, and then on to Canaan. So it's time to move from Elim. So they travel on, they head out, and they arrive kind of at the outskirts of the Egyptian territory. Now, Egypt, where they were, is like a city, and it's kind of like an area where it's confined, but the area that the nation of Egypt covered was pretty expansive. It's actually been 45 days since they've left Egypt, and they've been traveling, and they've arrived at this place called Sin. And this is just like an Egyptian outpost, kind of the outskirts of the territory that Egypt controls on their way out. And it's not a reference to like disobedience to God. It's a different spelling. It's a totally different word. It just happens to sound like that. It's the land of sin. And they get to this place. It's been 45 days and they're running out of food. And they complain to Moses about God. Remember, this is a pattern we're going to see in Exodus and then throughout the rest of the Old Testament. God provides, protects, and then they complain. And every time we do this, especially here in Exodus, we're going to take the time to recap every single time that God provided, protected, and Israel then subsequently complains. The first one being, God's going to save you, deliver you from Egypt. Hooray! Pharaoh increases the workload. Damn it, Moses! Leave us alone. Why did you bring this to us? We didn't ask to be freed in the first place. Okay, they get saved, freed from Egypt. They're on their way. They end up at a large body of water. Here comes the Egyptian army. Damn it, Moses. We could have died in Egypt. Why did you bring us out here to die by the hands of the army of Egypt? God protects them. They walk across the sea. They get across the sea and they get thirsty. There's no drinkable water. Damn it, Moses. Why did you bring us out here? The water's not drinkable. We wish we would have died in Egypt. Here again, they're traveling. It's been 45 days. Damn it, Moses, we're running out of food. We're hungry. We wish. The way that they actually complain to Moses is they say, we prefer to have died in Egypt than to have walked in this freedom that God has given us. We would rather be slaves, abused, oppressed, forced into hard labor, mistreated. We would rather be there than walk in relationship with the God who's been providing and protecting us all along. And so there is this like dynamic that begins to be revealed of the heart of this people. And it's not just this people. I think it's symptomatic of every person that we see throughout the Bible, and I would say is something that we can see in the world even today. God is saying, look, I've freed you. I want to be with you. God is actually trying to take them to the promised land, almost in an effort to kind of recreate Eden, where he is with his people. They are with him. He has protected them. He's providing for them. He is everything they need. All they have to do is follow him, trust him. Literally, that's all they have to do. You're not building bricks anymore. You're not making these monumental constructions, whatever they were making in Egypt. You're not being oppressed. You're not being abused. Like, all you have to do is trust this God who is giving you everything that you need. Well, the Israelites have had 400 years exposure to a God system, a religious system that the way that it works is you appease the gods. What you do is you bring sacrifices and offerings so that you get what you want from the gods. Yahweh God is actually leading them into a radically different worldview and a radically different religious view of how to interact with the divine. This God isn't demanding sacrifices so that he'll give you what you want. This God freely and readily gives you what you need. The sacrificial system that's going to be introduced, which we're not going to get into this time, is actually intended to just acknowledge and admit, I don't have any right to receive the free gifts that you're giving me. And so this is a totally different way of thinking about and interacting with supernatural beings. In this case, the God of all gods, Yahweh God, the creator of all these other spiritual beings who just happen to be in rebellion against him. And they don't want God's type of freedom. They want the Egyptian type. They want the type that says, we'll make sacrifices so that we get what we want, not so that we have to follow and trust after you. And this goes back to the garden, right? It's, I want to be God over my own life. I want to have dominion over everything. I want to get a say in what's right, good, and true. And Yahweh God says, I'm going to give you everything you need. You just have to follow me. You just got to trust me. And here's this example of, we don't trust you. We hate that you brought us out here. We hate where you're taking us. We don't like what you're giving us. We wish we were back in Egypt. We're running out of food. And instead of like zapping everybody, this is just a demonstration of God's character. This is how he feels about his people. He says, okay, I'll take care of it. So he calls Moses and Aaron. He says, okay, come over here, guys. And he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to explain to the people, every morning, I'm going to cover the ground surrounding the camp, wherever you guys are, with a white, flaky substance like coriander seed. And it's going to have all the nutrients that you need for the day, and it's going to taste like Cheerios, Honey Nut Cheerios. Yeah. Let's go with that. Very dumb Christianing this down. I'm going to cover the camp in Honey Nut Cheerios, and it's going to be good for you. But it's a white, flaky substance that it's supernatural. Bread from heaven is what it's referred to, or the bread of the angels as another reference to it, I think, in the Psalms. But this is God's supernatural provision of food. Every morning, outside the camp, the whole land is just going to have this like giant slice of bread on it. And you just go out. Each person will then go out of the camp and collect enough for each person in their house. And the measurement is called an omer. You're going to collect an omer for each person in your house. And God warns, he says, tell them not to get more than they need for the day, because if they get any and it stays overnight, like you keep extra for tomorrow, it's going to go bad. Don't do it. And then on the 6th day, so they have 7 days in their week. They already have a calendar just like we do. It's not that different. On the 6th day, collect double. So collect 2 omers for each person in your household. And 1 omer is what's going to feed you on day 7, because on day 7, there won't be anything out on the ground for you to collect. So don't even bother going out there, because what I want you to do on day 7 is I want you to just take the day, kick back, and reflect on all the ways that God has provided. Appreciate all the ways that God has been good. Just take day 7 to reflect on all the ways God has blessed you. That's going to be a Sabbath rest, and we got to keep that holy. On top of that provision, every night, I'm going to send flocks of quail into the camp, and you'll be able to trap, kill, and eat meat. So in the morning, you'll have Honey Nut Cheerios. At night, you'll have quail burgers. Like, you're going to have everything you need above and beyond. Again, here's God's provision. So the next morning, they go out, they see the land as far as they can see is covered in this giant slice of bread, and the families go out collecting 1 omer worth of this stuff for everyone. And as they're collecting it, they're holding it in their hand, they're saying, what is this? And the Hebrew here gets a little bit confusing, because sometimes it's translated, and they called it manna, which means, what is it? So they they turned the phrase, what is it, into a noun. Let's call it, what is it? And this is a little bit tricky because the actual Hebrew here doesn't quite translate what is it. You'll have to do some like background investigating to figure out what's going on here, but it's kind of manna, but it's not quite. So there's a weird spelling. But some scholars, and I think this actually gives me kind of like the best perspective on what's happening here. Some scholars say that there's an ancient Semite language in the Middle East here, and in their area, they have these insects that secrete this kind of substance that dries overnight, and in the morning, it is kind of white and flaky and edible, and it actually has like a sweet taste to it. And so here, the Israelites are saying, what is it? And they're trying to like wrap their minds around this supernatural provision. And they're like, oh, it's like manna, which is the word used in this other ancient Semite tribe language to describe the secretions of this insect. Now, it's not like they're trying to come up with these natural excuses. Oh, the whole land is just covered in these insect secretions every day. Right? And it just so happens that on the 7th, there's twice as much on the 6th day. There's none on the 7th day, and then it picks back up on the first day of the week. They're trying to wrap their minds around what is this like? How do we identify this? How do we talk about this? And they call it manna, which is the word used to describe that insect secretion that's edible. And then, there are some people who collect more than they need. They keep it over for the next day and it becomes moldy and it stinks and it's got worms and it's just rancid. So they have to like throw it away. And God's like, I warned you. What are you guys doing? And then on the 6th day, right, they go out, they collect double so that they don't have to collect anything else on the 7th day. But some of these families go back out on the 7th day. Sure enough, there's nothing out there. God, bro, what are you doing? I told you not to do this. Now, this is where we're going to run into about 4 issues of what's written in chapter 16 that we're going to have to wrestle with and ask the question, who actually wrote this? And it's going to extend into Genesis, this book, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. All 5 books traditionally are given credit to Moses having written them. There's a lot of Jewish tradition around this. They say, yeah, they're just the books of Moses. A lot of Christian tradition around it that just says, yeah, written by Moses. But there is also a view of critics of the Bible that say, well, Moses wrote some parts, Genesis, maybe some parts of Exodus, but someone else wrote Deuteronomy and others wrote Leviticus, Numbers, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Yeah, so Moses wrote some. Other scholars later, much, much later, like in Babylon, only 400 or 500 years before Jesus shows up on the scene, wrote the rest. And so there's some critical, like, well, where are we getting that? And then the view that we're going to take here at Dumb Christian, and this is based on some scholars who are really trying to understand what's actually going on, is that Moses wrote the first draft. He basically wrote Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then we notice that later, I think it's in Kings somewhere, like his writings were lost for decades, maybe centuries, for a long time. People forgot about them. They're discovered and then they're read out loud. Like people are like, oh, wow, we didn't realize there was actually writings about God. Like they kind of knew about God. They talked about God. They had a temple, right? They had these traditions that they were supposed to do with Yahweh God, but they kind of lost the writings. And once the writings were found, hundreds of years after this journey in the wilderness, they're reading these scriptures out loud and they're asking some questions. Hang on, what is happening here? And so some scholars say that some editors, some scribes, then added in some notes to help explain what was written by Moses. And so that's the position that we're going to take here at Dumb Christian, is that he basically wrote the body of content, and later readers who didn't quite understand fully what was being talked about in the original writings, some editors added some footnotes to help explain to their newer audience what was meant. And this is an example. So the first example here is the seventh day is to be considered a Sabbath rest. Now, they didn't have the law at this point. So the story is saying that God told Moses, hey, they need to follow and obey and honor the Sabbath. But they don't have the law yet. The law is not given till Exodus chapter 20. They are not at Sinai yet. They're still wandering. The only time we have ever read the word Sabbath is over during the creation story at the beginning of Genesis, where, yes, God says, I'm going to make the seventh day holy. It's a Sabbath rest, but there's no laws around it yet. So what is this instruction that God is giving to Moses to give to the people? Like, maybe they have an oral tradition about the creation story and Sabbath, but there's nothing that indicates they understand they need to keep it holy. They can't do work. Like, they're unaware of the significance of Sabbath. As slaves, they don't get a day off. So what's happening there with instructions to keep the Sabbath holy? There's also instructions on taking an omer of the manna, putting it in a jar, and placing the jar in front of the testimony. Now, later we know that this is taking this jar of supernatural manna, this gift that God had given supernaturally, and placing it in the ark. That's the correlation, is placing this in the ark. That's what the testimony is referring to, the tablets, the 10 Commandments, which we don't have yet, right? So what is happening there? Take a jar, an omer of manna, and place it in the ark. They don't have an ark yet. They don't even have the commandments yet. So why is the instruction being given here before any of that occurs? There's also an explanation that says this manna is the manna that Israel ate for 40 years in the wilderness, right up until they reached the land of promise, the land of Canaan, right? The promised land. Well, the manna doesn't stop until we get into the book of Joshua, where it says right before they entered into the land, the manna stopped the day after they ate from the fruit of the land. That's in Joshua. So how does Moses know? Because he's actually dead by the time this occurs in Joshua. How did he know that Israel ate for 40 years and that it stopped after they got to the promised land? How does he know that? And then also at the very end of chapter 16, there's this kind of like weird explanation of the measurement of an omer. He says an omer is a tenth of an ephah, because this is the only place in the entire Old Testament where an omer is used as a type of a measurement. So it's almost like there's this footnote added to explain to an audience who's reading this after the fact to say, oh, this is how much an omer is. So they can wrap their minds around the amount. So all these kind of like extra notes that seem like an editor later added to help their newer audience understand what Moses was writing when he did write it. And the reason at Dumb Christian why we're going to take the stance that Moses actually wrote like the original content is because there's references in the New Testament from Jesus, Peter, and Paul who all kind of make reference to the books of Moses or the writings of Moses, indicating they believed he was the original author. We're just kind of recognizing that there's some side notes, some footnotes added in here that don't really make sense for Moses to have written when he wrote the original content. And not to say that that takes credibility away. In fact, I think it adds some substance to say, oh, hey, we're recognizing that there are some things in here that aren't necessarily meaningful to the newer audiences closer to the time of Jesus. And they're saying, hey, this is what that meant. So then they're eating, they get food, they get manna in the morning, they get quail at night, and God says, okay, it's time to move on from this place. And this time he doesn't make the whole group move at once. He breaks up the Israelites into smaller groups, and he has them one at a time move into the next location, which is referred to as Rephidim. This means like a desolate desert area. They're still getting manna in the morning. They're still getting quail at night, but they come to this desert area, and lo and behold, they start bitching and moaning to Moses. We're thirsty. We don't have any water. Our canteens have run dry. We don't have anything left to drink. We wish you would have left us in Egypt rather than us being out here to die of thirst. Like, how many times... I'm not trying to turn this into a sermon or anything, but I think, like, if the Bible is true, if this is a true story, how many times does God need to, like, prove that he's going to take care of this people before they just, like, okay, we don't know how it's going to work, and we're a little bit thirsty right now, but we totally trust that you haven't forsaken us. You're going to take care of us. Okay. God promised to deliver them from Egypt. Sweet. They had to work more. They cursed Pharaoh. Or they curse God for Pharaoh making them work harder. Then they're freed, and they're at the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army is approaching. Oh, damn it, Moses. They get across the sea, and the water's bitter. Damn it, Moses. We want water. God gives them drinkable water. They go to the next place. We're hungry, running out of food. Damn it, Moses. God gives them manna and quail. They come here. It's desert. There's no water. Damn it, Moses. We're thirsty. And it's just this attitude. I would rather be enslaved than walk in God's type of freedom. And yet, here again is God saying, okay, I'll take care of it. And this time, Moses is actually scared. He comes up to God. He says, God, what am I going to do? They're going to stone me. They're going to kill me. And God says, don't worry, I'm going to take care of it. So what I want you to do, by this point, we're going to assume all of the whole nation of Israel has relocated, but they've been moving in groups. And he says, all right, Moses, what I want you to do is take that staff. You still got that staff that you used to turn the Nile into blood? Make sure you bring that staff with you. And what I want you to do is bring with you elders from the tribes of Israel. Bring them with you so they can see what's going on, so they can witness what we're about to do. And I want you to go up ahead of everybody a ways, and I'm going to lead you to something called the Rock of Horeb. Now, we're going to assume that this is the same mountain where where Moses encountered God in the burning bush. If you remember, way back in earlier in Exodus, he's at Horeb, where he encountered God. Horeb is in the region of Sinai, so they're getting close to where God wants them, and that's really important for what's about to happen after this event. They're getting close to Sinai, but they're not quite there. When they make it to Horeb, Moses gets up to this really large boulder called the Rock of Horeb. The elders are with him, and he hits the rock with the staff. The rock breaks open. Water gushes out. It becomes a river that flows back down to where the Israelites are complaining, and they get water. Now they have manna, quail, water. They've got it made as they start to approach Sinai. However, there is an army blocking them from reaching their final destination, Sinai. This is the army of the Amalekites. It's identified, the whole nation is just kind of identified as Amalek. And we first meet Amalek in Genesis chapter 36. Remember, Moses is writing Genesis, and so he's kind of like doing some name drops so that you pay attention to these names for later. We read about Genesis 36. Here is Amalek. Amalek is the grandson to Esau. If you remember, Esau is the twin brother to Jacob, the father of the Israelite nation. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. All the tribes of Israel come from Jacob. His twin brother Esau has a grandson named Amalek. Okay, bear with me for a little bit because we're going to have to do a little navigating to understand who Amalek is and why the descendants of Amalek, the Amalekites, are opposing the nation of Israel from reaching Sinai. When we read and discover who Amalek is in Genesis 36, we are given his genealogy, who his parents are. His grandfather is Esau, but I think his mother is actually a descendant from one of the tribes dispersed in Genesis chapter 11 where what happened? Anybody remember what happened in Genesis 11? Yes, the Tower of Babel. And God disperses the nations who are operating under this like supernatural wisdom and knowledge given by these spiritual beings in rebellion to build this ziggurat, a temple to the gods, right? In defiance of Yahweh God. And God says, I'm going to divide you up. And so instead of being one group of people who work with all these spiritual beings in rebellion against Yahweh God, God splits up the supernatural beings, the spiritual beings, and he says, okay, you guys can't be, I'm sending you to your corners. You can't work together anymore. So you're going to be independent. They become the gods over these tribes. And they continue to get back to work. If you remember in Genesis chapter 5, it says the sons of God, the supernatural beings that God has created, are like procreating with human beings, creating like this hybrid called, anyone remember what they're called? Nephilim. Yes, these giants who are revered as gods in human form, right? I mean, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. We have all these like other writings throughout Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East where they're talking about these giants in their land who have these supernatural powers and these qualities about them. And the flood occurs, wipes them out, but these gods get back to work and then they create Babel. God disperses these people groups who have within them, or they're entirely made up of these beings, these hybrids of like humans and supernatural beings, Anunnaki, Nephilim. There's a lot of different names, Rephaim. And one of the tribes dispersed here, Amalek's mother comes from one of those tribes. So she has in her DNA some of this like supernatural human spiritual being hybrid. And so the Amalekites are the descendants of these supernatural beings who have kind of hybrid procreation with humans. And so the Amalekites are either entirely made up of these giants with kind of some divine qualities, or at least have some of them as a part of the tribe of the Amalekites. And they are standing in direct opposition because they worship whichever god got sent over them as their tribe and is kind of in direct opposition to Yahweh. Remember, these spiritual beings are in rebellion against Yahweh. And so they're using this people group to stand in opposition to the Israelites to keep them from reaching the destination God wants to bring them. And this actually gives us a really good insight into what God is about to ask the Israelites to do when they're finally going to get into the land of Canaan. And there's this idea of, God just wants the Israelites to commit genocide and kill every man, woman, and child in the land of Canaan. But what we need to understand is that this is actually what God is trying to eliminate from the land of Canaan. He wants to remove and clean house of all of the perversions and the manipulations and the hybrids that the supernatural beings in rebellion have created with people. We need to clear the land out of all the remnant of these false gods, of this rebellious people and these rebellious spiritual beings who are in opposition to God. And he says, I want that out of my land. It's not just that God says, well, they're not my people, so let's just kill every man, woman, and child. He's saying, no, we need to remove the remnant of these perversions, these giants, these people who are revered as gods. We need to get them out of the land. We're going to start fresh. And this is one of those people groups in the way of the Israelites. So God says to Moses, hey, tell Joshua, this is where we meet a guy named Joshua, get a bunch of army men, soldiers ready for war, and then tomorrow we're actually going to go out and I'm going to have you go to war with Amalek, the Amalekites, who consist of either entirely of or have, people in their ranks, giants, these hybrids. And so the next day they go out to battle, and the text says, whenever Moses held his hands up, the Israelites had victory. But his arms began to grow tired, and when they fell down, the Israelites lost. I don't know the significance there. There's something about, like standing in victory. And so his arms start to get weak. And if you've seen the movie The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, right, and Ben-Hur, this is the scene where Aaron and Hur come up and hold Aaron's arms up, or hold Moses' arms up for him until Joshua and the Israelites have total victory. They eliminate the Amalekites, these hybrids that defy the living God. And then Moses says, yes, this victory is one that's going to go down in the history books. We are going to honor Joshua and Yahweh God for ages to come. And that's how 16 and 17 end. We're about to take a break from kind of the overarching story and get an insight into some of the details of what's going on behind the scenes, when they're like setting up shop and Moses is having to deal with people a little bit more directly. But we'll save that for next time. I love you guys. If you've enjoyed some of this content, please check out the sources below. I'm not making this up on my own. I'm relying on some other scholars smarter than I am. Subscribe, like, share this with your friends so that we don't go on this journey alone, and I will catch you in the next one. I love you guys.